Anyone want a Dr. Pepper? I believe what's definitely worth noting is how influential this film was in the Godzilla franchise going forward. It may not be the best installment in the series, being overshadowed by other films like Shin Godzilla, GMK, and vs. Destroya. However, Godzilla 1985 is the film that began one of the most popular eras of the franchise, the Heisei series, and gave us a new perspective on the monster himself. Many of the core elements of Godzilla's character find their roots in this film. And let me be clear up front, there are two versions of this film. The Return of Godzilla is the original Japanese version of this film released in 1984, and Godzilla 1985 is the American edit released by New World Pictures. Personally, I believe the latter to be the superior version. Don't judge. I'll explain later. But let's start with the plot. This film serves as a direct sequel to the original 1954 film, ignoring all other entries in between. This is a good thing. The previous era of the Godzilla series, the Showa era, ran from 1954 to 1975. It began with Godzilla being a terrifying monster who'd come to administer nature's vengeance on mankind for their use of the atomic bombs. However, over the course of 2 decades, Godzilla slowly morphed as a character, eventually becoming mankind's defender, a savior of children, a master of karate and friendship for everyone. However, with this change came a gradual decline in box office revenue. By the time Terror of Mechagodzilla came around in 1975, the writing was on the wall. The well had dried. Godzilla fatigue had set in, and Toho decided to put Godzilla on ice. Then, in 1984, Godzilla returned, and this time was back to the original vision for the character. Terrifying, destructive, and, more importantly, the driving force of his own story. Godzilla 1985 begins with a fishing vessel being caught in a storm in the Pacific. As it drifts towards a small island, the ground suddenly erupts, and a deafening roar cuts the night. Godzilla has returned. Apparently in this continuity, the oxygen destroyer didn't kill Godzilla in the first film. We never get a full explanation as to how he survived, but it's just fine with me. There's always been an element of mysticism surrounding Godzilla's character, and I like believing his return is always inevitable. The day after the storm, a reporter named Goro Maki stumbles upon the missing vessel. By the way, quick side note, the name Goro Maki is used in several different films across the span of the series, and I'm wondering if anyone can tell me if there's any particular reason they chose to do so. Also, I say that the MonsterVerse movie should have a character named Goro Maki at some point, just for the sake of tradition. Anyway, Maki boards the boat and finds the crew murdered and drained of their blood. Yeah, this is a Godzilla movie I'm describing, and it's starting off like a slasher film. As it turns out, a mutated sea louse that had been feeding on Godzilla boarded the boat and killed the crew. Just as it seems Maki is about to be drank up like a Capri Sun, he is saved by the last surviving crew member, Kenny. On the deck of the ship, Kenny cryptically describes what he saw in the storm. I always love the explaining the evil scenes in monster movies. Here, I absolutely love that purely the idea of Godzilla is terrifying, and we haven't even seen him yet. After the two are rescued, Maki goes to report what happened on the boat to his editor, but is told the government has put a gag order on the entire incident. They fear that word of Godzilla's return will cause a nationwide panic. And they're not wrong.
Run! It's Godzilla! God help us!
Instead, his editor tells him to stay on the story, and follow up with a professor named Hayashida. This guy is easily one of my favorite 2 characters in the film, possibly one of my favorites in the franchise. And his assistant, Naoko, just happens to be Kenny's sister. You see, Maki is able to recognize her because he kept Kenny's family photo even after they were rescued. Always thought that was weird. Anyway, back to the professor. Hayashida's family was killed by Godzilla during his first raid on Japan. He began to study the monster, at first out of vengeance, but since then, he's had a change of heart, understanding that Godzilla is more than just a monster. He has purpose.
The beast has a purpose.
He's a warning.
Godzilla's a warning.
When mankind falls into conflict with nature,
When
monsters...
mankind...
Are you gonna do this all day? Honestly though, this monologue has always stuck with me in terms of how I look at Godzilla's character. There are deeper elements to the King of the Monsters that the Showa era forgot over time. and I'm glad this film decided to step back and examine them. Kinda wish the Monsterverse had watched this scene before they wrote their series. Then again, for them, it's not about the message, it's about making money.
Who's ready to make a little money?
Things start to get interesting when Godzilla attacks a Russian nuclear sub, helmed by special guest star Ron Burgundy. Seriously though, what the fuck?
Well, hello.
Being that the Cold War was still on, the Russians immediately blamed the US for the loss of their sub. As tensions between the two countries flare, the Japanese Prime Minister realizes that the truth needs to be revealed, announcing that Godzilla was the culprit in the attack. The three nations decide to meet. Both the Russians and the Americans push for a nuclear response, in the event Godzilla makes landfall in Japan. However, the Prime Minister denies their request, citing his country's history with nuclear weapons. In the Japanese edit, there's even an idea that the US and Russians are looking to use this Godzilla incident as an opportunity to test their nuclear arsenal on foreign soil. However, the American edit removes this scene, along with a very brief moment where the US ambassador agrees with the Russians. Wait for it. Wait for it.
He's right.
There. You see, being that the Cold War was on at the time, the American editors opted to alter moments in the film to make it more anti-Russian. It all comes across pretty petty in retrospect. Like, my entire view of international relations will be changed by a Godzilla movie. There's even a plot point coming up where the entire context is changed in favor of making the Russians look like straight baddies, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Anyway, the Japanese begin sending their best stock footage to search for Godzilla. I'll always enjoy making that joke. However, it's Godzilla's turn to make a move. Out of the fog, Godzilla appears and lays waste to one of Japan's nuclear reactors. He destroys the facility and absorbs all the radiation from the core. Take note, this is the first time in the series where Godzilla attacks a nuclear power plant for sustenance. However, Godzilla abruptly stops when a flock of birds flies by, and he follows them back to the sea. Interestingly, the professor discovers that Godzilla's brain is like that of a bird, which share their ancestry with dinosaurs. This means that Godzilla's brain is wired to follow the same homing instinct as migratory birds. The professor hypothesizes that this instinct could be used to mankind's advantage, and begins developing a new countermeasure against Godzilla. Just want to point out that this is actually one of the first sci-fi movies to acknowledge the shared link between birds and dinosaurs, and this movie even predates Jurassic Park. Take that, Spielberg, you hack. Bell. Now that Godzilla has attacked Japan, they're sure he will return. It's in the title. However, the government has two plans they are going to use to stop the monster, and they're pretty solid. The military's plan is to use a new weapon called the Super X. Oh, everybody loves the Super X. It's an attack plane that was initially designed to defend the capital, but has been refitted with cadmium missiles, which can disrupt the nuclear fission in Godzilla's body. Not to mention it's also armed with rockets, lasers, bombs, and a tape deck. I mean, what's the point in saving the country if you can't listen to J-pop while you do it? The second plan is Hayashida's, who has developed a sonic emitter to emulate the frequency of chirping birds. His hope is to use this frequency to lure Godzilla to a nearby volcano, Mount Mihara, and send him back to Earth.
It's a bold strategy, Cotton. Let's see if it pays off for him.
Now, while all this has been going on, the American edit decided to add in a few new scenes to the movie from the perspective of the American military. These mostly feature Raymond Burr, aka Steve Martin, the American insert character in the original film, and one of the few survivors of Godzilla's first attack. These scenes take place in the Pentagon, where a few top officials watch the movie from behind their thinly veiled folding tables. I mean, seriously, I never noticed how shoddy this set looked until recently. It's also worth acknowledging the most hated character in this film, possibly the entire franchise. Major Ginger. I don't even want to know his character's real name. His job is to be the comic relief in this otherwise serious film. He makes jokes. He drinks Dr. Pepper. He makes you embarrassed to like this movie. You know, on IMDb, The Return of Godzilla has 6.6 stars, and Godzilla 1985 only has 6.1. And I would bet my bottom dollar that that half-star difference is purely this asshole's fault.
Well, just look at the big screen. Wonder Lizard is down for the count.
Man, you corny! Oh, found the emergency exit.
Now it's time for the main event. Godzilla is spotted moving into Tokyo Bay and the film goes into overdrive. The evacuation of Tokyo begins and thousands flee the city. Meanwhile, the operation on Mount Mihara is prepared. As night falls on the city, the Japanese military lines its forces along the shores of Tokyo Bay and waits for the inevitable. Then, at almost the exact halfway point of the movie,
Surprise, motherfucker!
Godzilla surfaces and is immediately engaged by the Air Force. God, I love the soundtrack for this scene. However, he shrugs off their attacks and proceeds to the shoreline where the bulk of Japan's ground forces are waiting. Even they can't slow his advance and are wiped out in a single atomic breath. God damn. My man checks his work, gives a victory screech, and enters the defenseless city. Oh, I forgot to mention, there was a freighter stationed in the dockyard during Godzilla's attack. But this was no ordinary freighter. Oh no. This was a Russian freighter. And on board this freighter, there were controls for a Russian nuclear missile orbiting in space. And Godzilla damaging the ship activated the launch sequence.
Oh my god, no!
Why would they program the launch sequence to react to the ship's hull integrity? I don't know, but thank God one of the sailors aboard is willing to stop the missile before it can launch. Oh wait, never mind. In the American edit of the film, they recontextualized the scene so that this man was actually trying to start the launch. We even get this inserted shot where a finger goes up to press the big ominous launch button. Lord have mercy. Now, we'll see the fallout of this nuclear missile launch later in the film, but the fact that New World Pictures felt the need to alter this scene to demonize the Russians is just... wow. Now Godzilla's entered the city, and there's pandemonium on the streets. Crowds flee in panic and emergency vehicles scatter out of his way. Unfortunately, a news chopper drifts too close into Godzilla's path, and he shoots it down. Oh, hey look, who are you gonna call? The chopper crashes down on a packed freeway, which somehow sets off a chain reaction of explosions down the highway. Utterly ridiculous as it is, it does look pretty sick. As Godzilla destroys a train, the American military looks on. And here comes a line that's stuck with me since childhood.
That's quite an urban renewal program they got going over there.
No, not that one.
He's looking for something. Searching. If only we could figure out what it is before it's too late.
It wasn't until I heard this line that I started questioning what Godzilla's motives are for attacking Tokyo. What compels him to keep returning to Japan's capital? This is a question that I've always wanted definitively answered because it could reveal a lot about Godzilla's internal machinations. I want to know what his priorities are when he's not facing down enemy monsters. Following up with that, we get one of my favorite little moments in the movie. Now, I'm sure most people don't give this moment a second thought, but this is why I love this movie. The fact that Godzilla's roar can be heard throughout the city, yet we don't know exactly where he is, gives this movie a killers inside the house kind of feeling. The fact that you know he's near, but don't know exactly where, is unnerving. I mean, we already saw this dude appear out of the fog like a specter, so adding the scene where you hear his roars echoing across the skyscrapers gives this feeling of inevitable dread. The danger's getting closer, yet we don't need to see him to feel that fear. Now, here comes the scene that exemplifies why the American edit is just better. So, the professor and group have been waiting for Godzilla to enter their area to test their sonic emitter. So just as Godzilla moves in front of their building, they turn it on to see if they can get his attention. And they do. What was step 2? Now, in the American edit of this scene, the music swells as Godzilla turns around. He moves towards the building. The professor clutches his pearls, but a laser truck distracts Godzilla at the last second. Now, in the Japanese version, they get his attention, Godzilla turns around, and then he just kinda stands there. These guys start having a casual conversation, the music breathes a sigh of relief, all the while Godzilla is just frozen in place. Then the laser truck hits him and the scene continues. Vastly different vibes. Anyway, the laser trucks lure Godzilla out into an open area in the heart of the city. Note that he seems a lot smaller than the buildings around him now. For some reason, Godzilla seems to change sizes throughout the film. Personally, I like him being dwarfed by the skyscrapers here. It makes him feel more like a lost animal, and it shows just how much bigger a threat mankind has become over the past 30 years. It suits the moment, because now he finds himself face to face with the ace up mankind's sleeve, the Super X. When you hear that proud music hit, you feel the tide change in mankind's favor. Now, check this out. The Super X tanks Godzilla's heat beam, then fires up a couple flares for him to gawk at, while they fire cadmium missiles down his goddamn throat. In less than 2 minutes, he's down for the count.
Well, just look at the big screen. Wonder Lizard is down for the count.
You feel good about that? You feel good about what you just said? Fuck out of here. Now, I can understand people watching this scene and thinking this moment makes Godzilla look like a chump. Personally, I like how this scene makes mankind look competent. They did their homework, implemented a strategy using Godzilla's biology against him, and succeeded. It ain't the 50s anymore, and mankind has learned from the past. Also, this moment makes me feel for Godzilla. Rather than seeing him as an unstoppable death machine, he now looks like an animal with weaknesses. This seed of vulnerability is what grows into an immense emotional payoff in the end. Now, everyone breathes a sigh of relief as it seems Godzilla's finally been defeated. Everyone except the Professor and Steve Martin. They know Godzilla can't be dealt with so easily. Now, remember that Russian nuke that launched earlier? Yep, headed straight for Godzilla. This may spell the end of Tokyo.
Oh my god, no!
However, the Americans launch a countermissile to blow the nuke out of the sky. As all this is taking place, the main group finds themselves still trapped in that building overlooking Godzilla. However, Kenny shows up in a chopper and manages to evacuate the Professor and his device to Mount Mihara.
Professor!
However, the winds are too strong for anyone else to be rescued, so the lovebirds are left behind to cook in the nuclear blast. Luckily for them, the missile is intercepted and Tokyo is saved. However, the energy from the resulting nuclear blast saturates the atmosphere, converts to lightning, and revives Godzilla. I'm sure there are at least 8 things scientifically wrong with this series of events, but the message is still clear. Even though Godzilla was defeated, mankind still possesses a nuclear arsenal, and as long as nukes exist, Godzilla will live. Now that he's back on his feet, Godzilla absolutely assaults the Super X, blowing holes through buildings, detonating fuel reserves on it, and eventually blows out their engines. With the Super X left defenseless, Godzilla drops a skyscraper on them, and ends the fight for good. Now, there's nothing left to stop Godzilla, and there's no one left around but these two. Oh, and some bum. Literally, there's some homeless guy we've been following around as he goes to a fancy restaurant and eventually helps our heroes scale down their building. But here he takes a handbag, goes off running, falls over, and gets trampled by Godzilla. Well, at least in the American edit. In the Japanese version, he just kind of falls asleep. Okay. So Maki and Naoko are running around trying to find an escape in this vast expanse of leveled city, but I guess there simply isn't one. As Godzilla looms over them, the Professor activates the sonic emitter at Mount Mihara. Godzilla stops dead in his tracks like the Manchurian Candidate and wanders off to meet his fate. As he makes his way to the volcano, the music flares up, and everyone watches along as... Seriously? Now? Product placement now. No, yeah, that really helps the moment, thank you. Ginger fuck. Godzilla makes landfall on Oshima Island, and essentially begins a death march to the rim of the volcano. Compelled by his migratory instinct, he approaches the edge and falls in. That's when the explosives are detonated, and Godzilla is sent plummeting into the lava below. And anyone who's ever seen this movie will never forget his final scream. What we initially thought of as an unstoppable engine of destruction meets his fate sounding like a terrified animal. But Godzilla has returned to Earth. As the volcano erupts in the final moments of the film, we hear a monologue written by Raymond Burr himself, talking about Godzilla's purpose and what nature has taught us. Fade to black. I think the first thing that needs to be addressed about this film is its tone. This movie is definitely my favorite because of how somber and suspenseful it feels. I mean, we start in a storm, go to a haunted house, Godzilla fades in out of the fog, and his roars echo off the skyline of Tokyo. Everything just feels so dark and menacing. Never do you find yourself in a setting where you feel safe from Godzilla. Not even the military guys watching on the monitors are safe. What really brings home this dark, brooding atmosphere is the music. This soundtrack is utterly fantastic. Every time I start up this movie, the opening notes just send a shiver down my spine. The music will tend to fluctuate from a deep, almost droning tone before it bombastically pounces at you. Something about it is animalistic and puts you on edge. Speaking of the soundtrack, I'm glad they left out any of the original Godzilla themes from this movie. They just wouldn't fit the atmosphere. However, I think there are a couple of musical references sprinkled throughout.
Simon says, get the fuck up, throw your hands in the sky. Weezer's in the back, sipping ya.
Now, I can go on for a while about the drastic differences in pacing between the Japanese and American versions of this film, but I'll keep it short. The point I want to make is that the American version has a certain momentum to it that the Japanese version simply lacks. Often during the Japanese version, Godzilla will just be standing there for extended periods of time. You really feel those moments, and not in a good way. Choices like Godzilla firing first at the Super X in the American version, instead of him firing last in the Japanese version, make it feel like Godzilla's on the advance. I already talked about the scene where the professor comes face to face with Godzilla and how totally different both versions feel. But also, the American edit spares us some moments that would completely take us out of the movie otherwise. Let's just get it out of the way, folks. The giant foot. This ridiculous looking foot prop was utterly removed from the American edit, and that is undoubtedly a smart choice. I mean, the film already has a hard enough time trying to nail down Godzilla's size, so the last thing you need is this silly fucking foot. On top of that, I like the more condensed version of Maki's encounter with the sea louse. The American version is quick and to the point, and doesn't give you much time to understand the threat.
By the time I process, like, is that a rat? Is that mechanical? That thing would be up my leg, taking chunks out of the side of my head.
The Japanese version, it has this shot. Enough said. Though, I do wish they kept in Maki's silent POV as he enters the bowels of the ship. Aside from that, a lot of moments are streamlined, like the montage where Tokyo is evacuated. In the American version, it's more concise, builds tension, and gets you hyped for what's to come. In the Japanese version, this single montage is split into 3 separate montages that almost feel like they're starting from zero every time the next begins. Like I said, watch them side by side and you'll feel it. I wish I could just show you the comparison, but Lord knows I have enough copyright laser beams to dodge. However, we can't talk about the editing without talking about the American inserts and the moments cut for political purposes. As good as the editing is, all you remember is this ginger fuck swilling Dr. Pepper. I have never seen a single character undermine so much goodwill. And don't go blaming the actor. The guy is just playing the role he was given. The real disrespect comes from the creative minds at New World Pictures that didn't respect the source material. In fact, had it not been for Raymond Burr's involvement, this movie may have turned out as a Leslie Nielsen comedy spoof. I'm dead serious.
Please disperse. Nothing to see here, please.
Raymond Burr respected the Godzilla franchise. He understood what the character meant to the fans. I couldn't tell you his thoughts on the Showa era, but his involvement on the original film definitely left a lasting impression on him. When he heard the filmmakers were trying to make 1985 into more of a comedy, he shut that shit down like they were late in the bill. Hell, just listen to his monologue at the end of this film that he wrote himself, and you know this guy was a real one. You know, there's a story where one of the crew approached Burr, asking him to be the one drinking that Dr. Pepper on camera. Burr just stared him down until he walked away. Some Chuck Norris shit right there. I mean, the guy just has this screen presence that commands authority, like he's the wise old sage who understands the beast. He's like the Quint to Godzilla's Jaws. That, and he carries around this little dragon idol. I have no idea what it is, and I'd wager it was Burr's idea to incorporate it. It's almost like a mystical artifact that's somehow tied to Godzilla, almost like those stones in Gamera Guardian of the Universe. It always feels like he knows something that the rest of us don't, and he knows he could never explain it. He saw something in those fires that burned Tokyo 30 years ago. Something that needs to be seen to be understood. Put down the Dr. Now, I think it's also worth mentioning the little moments that we just accept as we go along. Firstly, the animatronic model for Godzilla looks great. Maybe it doesn't hold up now, but I love the articulation of Godzilla's mannerisms. I like that we can see his chest move as he breathes, or when his lip curls as he roars. It adds a little bit of life to his character. Also, I think we should stop and acknowledge the stunt work on this film. They flooded this room full of guys, they had people dangling out of helicopters, there was a guy on fire, and I stabbed a man with a trident. Take a look at this little detail. I never noticed this before. There's a little model fighter jet outside the cockpit window. It's minor, but it's a great use of props to bridge the shots and make the scene feel whole. Now, let's talk about the true star of the film, Godzilla. This has to be my favorite characterization of the monster. I love his design in this movie, though I will admit, there are some shots that don't do him justice. And the rubber and animatronic suits don't completely match up. It's also worth noting that this is one of the last times we see Godzilla with whites in his eyes, save for GMK, obviously. And I think there's a reason. Sure, it's a little cartoonish, but it adds something relatable to him. I think that plays into the sympathy we feel for the character as the film progresses, and that was the big takeaway from this movie for me. Godzilla begins the movie as this intimidating, destructive monster, this roaring in the darkness. However, the movie takes the time to break him down to understand how he truly operates. We learn that he has weaknesses. We see that he's beholden to his natural instincts. And we see him afraid. I keep thinking back to that shot of him surrounded by all those massive skyscrapers. It reminds me of that scene in Peter Jackson's King Kong, where Kong is in New York and seems confused and frightened by his surroundings. However, in this case, Godzilla came to Tokyo of his own accord. Except that he doesn't even seem to understand why. He's compelled by instinct to return. He's looking for something. Searching. I like to believe that this version of Godzilla wants mankind to defeat him. We brought him into the world, so we're the only ones who could take him out. Maybe he keeps returning to our major cities to dare us to finish the job. And even when we find a way to send him back to Earth, he's still afraid to go. He was never intended to exist. He's a mutated aberration. Sure, he's supposed to serve as nature's warning to mankind, but it doesn't mean he wanted to be. Come to think of it, there's a line the professor says that's pretty interesting.
Godzilla's more like a nuclear weapon. Destined to walk the Earth forever.
Destined to walk the world forever. It almost sounds as though he's cursed by his own existence. The way I like to look at it is that Godzilla is a suffering animal, looking for either purpose or death. Nature tasked him with bringing vengeance upon mankind, essentially to feed on destruction. However, thinking back on that scene at the reactor, Godzilla immediately drops his rampage when the birds fly by, and his migratory instinct kicks in. Maybe it wasn't so much an unconscious compulsion as it was him feeling a sense of belonging. Godzilla's alone in the world. I've always wondered if that loneliness takes a toll on him. Maybe as he made that final march to the volcano, he expected to find something that would fulfill him. A purpose beyond causing destruction. Maybe even more of his own kind. But when he finally arrives, he just finds a pit of death. He gives this look like he's disappointed. However, he goes into the volcano all the same, as death is still better than a cursed existence. I think that's what makes this movie great. This is the first time in the series that we learned we can sympathize with Godzilla without making him into a heroic figure. When he first debuted in 1954, we saw him for his raw power and we respected him for it. Then as the Showa era continued, we began to start liking him, but maybe started respecting him a little less. However, 1985 combines the two, where we both respect and sympathize for this misunderstood monster. We see what he's capable of, but we also get to see another vulnerable side to him. This new take on the character is what paved the way for the Heisei series, which ends in a heartfelt farewell to the monster. I think that payoff wouldn't have been nearly successful without 1985 planting the seeds it did. This movie laid the groundwork for Godzilla being seen as more than just a destructive force of nature. It made us feel for the guy. And that's why I simply love this film. Though, if we're being honest, I'd also be curious to see what a Leslie Nielsen Godzilla crossover would look like.